Jessica strode briskly down the aisle, the click of her heels against the carpet echoing with authority. She stopped abruptly at Ava's seat, her narrowed eyes scanning the poised black woman sitting upright, gently folding a book in her lap. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jessica's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp like a blade. "I believe you're sitting in the wrong seat." Ava raised her head, her serene gaze locking with Jessica's. Her voice was calm yet resolute as she replied, "I don't think so. This is my seat." Jessica scoffed lightly, crossing her arms over her chest. "This area is reserved for elite passengers," she said, emphasizing the last two words loud enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. The cabin seemed to tighten with unease. Whispers began to circulate, and curious glances darted toward Ava. But Ava remained unshaken, her demeanor exuding an unyielding grace. How do you think Ava will respond? Don't jump to conclusions just yet. This story holds profound lessons you won't want to miss. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned to discover what happens next. The flight attendant's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll ask one last time. Are you moving to the back of the plane, or do I need to call security?" Her tone was sharp, laced with undeniable contempt. Ava Harrington, a composed black woman, remained as calm as ever. She lifted her head and locked eyes with the flight attendant. "I already said I'm not moving." Her voice was steady, almost gentle, yet it carried an undeniable strength. Humiliated in front of everyone, Ava's restraint and poise concealed a truth no one anticipated, a truth that would soon change everything. The woman they assumed to be powerless would stand tall, revealing her true self. The private jet shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its sleek design a promise of luxury for the exclusive passengers aboard. Inside, the cabin exuded opulence, leather-upholstered seats, gilded accents, and an air of exclusivity that made every entrant feel like a member of the elite. Passengers moved freely, their expensive luggage trailing behind them as they were guided onto the gleaming aircraft waiting on the tarmac. Some scrolled through their phones, while others sipped champagne served by the attentive crew. Light music played softly, creating a relaxing atmosphere. Ava Harrington, a composed woman in her late 30s, stepped into the cabin. Draped in a perfectly tailored navy suit, she exuded understated elegance. Each step she took was confident yet unassuming, drawing little attention despite the undeniable aura of authority she carried. Her gaze swept over the cabin briefly before settling on her seat. This trip was far from a casual getaway. It was a journey to oversee the rapid expansion of her growing empire. But no one else aboard the flight knew that, and Ava had no intention of revealing it. Near the cabin entrance, Jessica Morgan, the lead flight attendant, stood poised. Her crisp uniform and sharp features reflected an air of control. She greeted passengers with practiced smiles, warm for some, frosty for others. Jessica took pride in maintaining order on her flights, though her concept of order often relied on appearances and personal judgment. Jessica greeted Ava with a curt nod. "Welcome aboard," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. Right behind Ava were Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, a couple in their 60s, exuding the relaxed demeanor of seasoned luxury travelers. Mrs. Bennett held a small knitting bag, her fingers ready to dive into her favorite pastime. Mr. Bennett clutched a neatly folded newspaper, his eyes scanning the surroundings with mild curiosity. Jessica's smile brightened noticeably. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Lovely to see you again." Ava turned her head slightly, noting the stark difference in Jessica's tone. Though her expression remained composed, a flicker of awareness lit her eyes, registering the unspoken dynamics at play. Once everyone was settled, Jessica moved through the cabin, meticulously checking details. She paused by the Bennetts, her smile warm and attentive. "May I bring you anything before takeoff?" she asked. Mrs. Bennett shook her head politely, already engrossed in her knitting. Mr. Bennett gestured to his coffee cup, indicating he was content. When Jessica approached Ava's seat, however, her demeanor shifted. She glanced at Ava's neatly placed handbag under the seat, her lips pressing into a thin line. She neither smiled nor spoke, merely brushing past without acknowledgement. Jessica Morgan, in her early 40s, carried herself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. Her impeccable uniform and carefully styled hair underscored her sharp, no-nonsense personality. For Jessica, appearances were paramount, and her judgments were swift, rarely requiring reconsideration. Her eyes narrowed as she observed Ava seated calmly. Something about Ava unsettled her, not the tailored suit or the quiet confidence, but the fact that Ava made no effort to demand attention or prove her place among the elite. To Jessica, Ava didn't belong here. Jessica approached Ava with brisk, deliberate steps, her lips curling into a forced smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her tone polite yet dripping with condescension. "I believe you're sitting in the wrong seat." Ava looked up, her gaze steady. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, her voice firm and unwavering. Jessica maintained her smile, but her tone sharpened. "I don't think so. This area is reserved for premium passengers." Her emphasis on the last words carried loudly enough for nearby passengers to take notice. A woman with perfectly coiffed hair leaned forward slightly, curious about the exchange. Across the aisle, a friendly-looking businessman frowned at Jessica's tone. Ava, unbothered, met Jessica's gaze squarely. "Perhaps you should check the passenger list before making assumptions." Jessica's brow arched, irritation flashing in her eyes. "I don't need to check anything," she snapped. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The flight attendant's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll ask one last time, are you moving to the back of the plane, or do I need to call security?" Her tone was sharp, laced with undeniable contempt. Ava Harrington, a composed black woman, remained as calm as ever. She lifted her head and locked eyes with the flight attendant. "I already said I'm not moving." Her voice was steady, almost gentle, yet it carried an undeniable strength. Humiliated in front of everyone, Ava's restraint and poise concealed a truth no one anticipated, a truth that would soon change everything. The woman they assumed to be powerless would stand tall, revealing her true self. The private jet shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its sleek design a promise of luxury for the exclusive passengers aboard. Inside, the cabin exuded opulence, leather-upholstered seats, gilded accents, and an air of exclusivity that made every entrant feel like a member of the elite. Passengers moved freely, their expensive luggage trailing behind them as they were guided onto the gleaming aircraft waiting on the tarmac. Some scrolled through their phones, while others sipped champagne served by the attentive crew. Light music played softly, creating a relaxing atmosphere. Ava Harrington, a composed woman in her late 30s, stepped into the cabin. Draped in a perfectly tailored navy suit, she exuded understated elegance. Each step she took was confident yet unassuming, drawing little attention despite the undeniable aura of authority she carried. Her gaze swept over the cabin briefly before settling on her seat. This trip was far from a casual getaway. It was a journey to oversee the rapid expansion of her growing empire. But no one else aboard the flight knew that, and Ava had no intention of revealing it. Near the cabin entrance, Jessica Morgan, the lead flight attendant, stood poised. Her crisp uniform and sharp features reflected an air of control. She greeted passengers with practiced smiles, warm for some, frosty for others. Jessica took pride in maintaining order on her flights, though her concept of order often relied on appearances and personal judgment. Jessica greeted Ava with a curt nod. "Welcome aboard," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. Right behind Ava were Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, a couple in their 60s, exuding the relaxed demeanor of seasoned luxury travelers. Mrs. Bennett held a small knitting bag, her fingers ready to dive into her favorite pastime. Mr. Bennett clutched a neatly folded newspaper, his eyes scanning the surroundings with mild curiosity. Jessica's smile brightened noticeably. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Lovely to see you again." Ava turned her head slightly, noting the stark difference in Jessica's tone. Though her expression remained composed, a flicker of awareness lit her eyes, registering the unspoken dynamics at play. Once everyone was settled, Jessica moved through the cabin, meticulously checking details. She paused by the Bennetts, her smile warm and attentive. "May I bring you anything before takeoff?" she asked. Mrs. Bennet shook her head politely, already engrossed in her knitting. Mr. Bennet gestured to his coffee cup, indicating he was content. When Jessica approached Ava's seat, however, her demeanor shifted. She glanced at Ava's neatly placed handbag under the seat, her lips pressing into a thin line. She neither smiled nor spoke, merely brushing past without acknowledgement. Jessica Morgan, in her early 40s, carried herself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. Her impeccable uniform and carefully styled hair underscored her sharp, no-nonsense personality. For Jessica, appearances were paramount, and her judgments were swift, rarely requiring reconsideration. Her eyes narrowed as she observed Ava seated calmly. Something about Ava unsettled her, not the tailored suit or the quiet confidence, but the fact that Ava made no effort to demand attention or prove her place among the elite. To Jessica, Ava didn't belong here. Jessica approached Ava with brisk, deliberate steps, her lips curling into a forced smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her tone polite yet dripping with condescension. "I believe you're sitting in the wrong seat." Ava looked up, her gaze steady. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, her voice firm and unwavering. Jessica maintained her smile, but her tone sharpened. "I don't think so. This area is reserved for premium passengers." Her emphasis on the last words carried loudly enough for nearby passengers to take notice. A woman with perfectly coiffed hair leaned forward slightly, curious about the exchange. Across the aisle, a friendly-looking businessman frowned at Jessica's tone. Ava, unbothered, met Jessica's gaze squarely. "Perhaps you should check the passenger list before making assumptions." Jessica's brow arched, irritation flashing in her eyes. "I don't need to check anything," she snapped. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The air inside the cabin was stifling, tension so thick it felt like a string pulled taut and ready to snap. A few passengers exchanged glances, whispering to one another. Others feigned ignorance, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Someone murmured, "Why doesn't she just move if she's in the wrong seat?" Another shrugged dismissively. "She's probably trying to sneak into first class for free." Jessica, arms crossed tightly across her chest, stood firm. Her voice rang out louder, deliberately projecting for everyone to hear. "If you don't move to the back, I'll have to call security." Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Call whoever you need. I'm not moving." The curious woman seated nearby gasped softly, her mouth falling open in shock. Across the aisle, the businessman furrowed his brows, leaning forward, his displeasure evident. Jessica, now visibly impatient, turned sharply toward her junior colleague, Emily, a young flight attendant who hovered nearby with an anxious expression. "Emily," Jessica snapped, her voice cutting like a knife, "escort her to the back. Now." Emily hesitated, her eyes darting between Ava and Jessica. She wanted to speak up, to suggest checking the passenger list as Ava had mentioned, but Jessica's icy glare silenced her. Left with no choice, Emily nodded hesitantly and stepped forward. Ava, still seated, shifted slightly, her calm gaze now on Emily. "You should think carefully about what you're doing," Ava said, her tone gentle yet laden with unmistakable gravity. Jessica let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, waving off Ava's warning. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Now get up." Her voice was taut with frustration, and she pointed toward the back of the plane. "You don't belong here," she said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. The cabin was silent, all eyes locked on the confrontation. The atmosphere buzzed with tension, like static electricity waiting to spark. Ava leaned back slightly in her seat, meeting Jessica's glare with calm resolve. "Don't be so quick to judge people." Jessica scoffed, her forced smile thin and biting. "And you shouldn't sit where you haven't paid to be." Without another word, Ava reached for her phone resting on the armrest. She typed quickly, then set it back down, her expression unchanged. She spoke quietly, her voice steady but resolute. "You're making a mistake." Her words hung in the air, but Jessica dismissed them with a sneer. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. Turning back to Emily, Jessica gestured sharply for her to act. Emily, her hands trembling slightly, edged toward the cockpit where the passenger list was clipped. She bent her head, scanning the names in hopes of finding something that might help Ava. Noticing Emily's action, Jessica's expression darkened, and her voice cut through the silence like a whip. "Emily, what are you doing?" Emily's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I just thought I'd check," Jessica interrupted harshly, her authority unmistakable. "I told you, I'm in control here." Emily froze, her face flushing with embarrassment. Meanwhile, Ava remained seated, her calm gaze fixed on Jessica as if waiting for her to unravel her own mistake. Emily stepped back, torn between doing what was right and her fear of losing her job. The tension in the cabin was palpable, as if every breath held the threat of escalation. Across from Ava, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit leaned forward slightly, offering a polite smile. "Excuse me, ma'am, is everything all right?" Ava turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm fine, thank you," she said evenly, her gratitude evident in her tone. Before the man could say more, Jessica cut in, her voice curt and tinged with irritation. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage this disruption." She turned back to Ava, pointing a finger at her. "You're causing a scene." The man's brows knitted together, and he replied calmly, "As far as I can tell, the only one causing a scene here is you." Jessica's face flushed crimson, her eyes narrowing dangerously. Turning back to Ava, she hissed, "I've had enough of this. Either you move, or I'll make sure you're removed from this plane." Ava's gaze didn't waver as she met Jessica's eyes directly. "Go ahead. Try." Her voice was soft but carried the weight of unshakable conviction, a challenge that left Jessica momentarily stunned. Now visibly agitated, Jessica leaned closer to Ava, her tone sharp and condescending. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Ava remained silent, her calm demeanor only fueling Jessica's frustration. Finally, Jessica spun on her heel, grabbing the tray of drinks from a nearby cart with enough force to rattle the glasses. Her heels clacked loudly against the carpet as she stormed away, her anger on full display. Ava watched her leave, her expression composed, then quietly resumed flipping through the book on her lap. The murmurs of passengers filled the cabin once more, but Ava seemed unfazed, her poise untouched by the commotion. Moments later, Jessica returned, carrying the tray with noticeably less patience. As she approached Ava, she spoke in a clipped tone. "Would you like something to drink?" Ava looked up briefly, her voice calm as always. "May I have a glass of water, please?" Jessica's eyes flashed with irritation. She gave a curt nod but didn't bother to mask her disdain. "I'll serve you when I have time." The curt voice sliced through the cabin as Jessica walked away without a backward glance. Ava Harrington watched her retreating figure, her gaze calm and composed, betraying none of the simmering tension. Minutes passed. Ava adjusted her position slightly, stretching one leg into the aisle for comfort. Jessica returned, holding a tray of water glasses. Her sharp eyes caught Ava's small movement instantly. Instead of addressing it, Jessica deliberately altered her path. In an instant, Jessica's leg collided forcefully with Ava's outstretched one. The tray tilted, spilling icy water over Ava's tailored pants and onto the cabin floor. Jessica let out a shrill cry. "Watch your leg. You made me spill the water." The commotion caused heads to turn, passengers murmuring in surprise. Ava looked up, momentarily startled, but her composure remained intact. She calmly brushed the water from her trousers and replied in an even tone, "You bumped into my leg, not the other way around." Jessica glared at Ava, her eyes blazing with frustration. Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze unyielding and piercing. "I only asked to be treated with the same fairness as everyone else. If that's too much to ask, perhaps the person who doesn't belong here is you." Ava's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Jessica's face turned crimson as she stepped closer, lowering her voice into a hiss laced with anger. "Do you think you have the right to speak to me like that?" Without warning, Jessica lost control. Her hand lashed out, delivering a sharp slap across Ava's face. The sound echoed through the cabin, crisp and shocking, like a lightning strike on a clear day. The cabin froze. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A suited man shot to his feet, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. Emily, the young flight attendant standing nearby, raised her hand to her mouth, her wide eyes filled with horror. Even the curious woman from earlier sat motionless, her face pale with unease. Ava sat upright, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Her face remained calm, though her eyes gleamed with sharp intensity as they locked onto Jessica's. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. When Ava finally spoke, her voice was soft yet as cutting as a blade. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Her words sliced through the suffocating silence, leaving Jessica visibly unsettled. Ava continued, her tone measured and deliberate, each word resonating like a bell in the tense cabin. "I've been patient with you, but your behavior has crossed every line of decency." Jessica's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. Her voice rose, defensive and shrill. "Crossed a line? You've been the one causing trouble since the moment you boarded." Ava didn't flinch, didn't touch her face, didn't retaliate in kind. Instead, she straightened her back, her steady gaze remaining fixed on Jessica. Her poise was unshakable, a stark contrast to Jessica's simmering rage. "You will regret this," Ava said, her tone calm yet authoritative, her words carrying an undeniable weight that filled the cabin. For a moment, Jessica faltered, her confidence wavering under Ava's unwavering presence. But she quickly masked it, forcing a scornful laugh. "Regret? What are you going to do? Call the cops?" Ava didn't respond. Her silence spoke louder than any words, and the energy in the cabin shifted palpably. The balance of power had begun to tip. From a corner of the cabin, Emily observed everything, her emotions a mixture of fear and resolve. She had witnessed Jessica's behavior throughout the day, each instance of arrogance and hostility stirring a growing discomfort within her. Now, watching Ava endure this treatment, Emily knew she couldn't remain silent any longer. Quietly, Emily stepped back and pulled out her phone. Her hand trembled as she dialed. When the call connected, her voice was soft but firm. "This is Emily. We have a situation on board." After ending the call, Emily returned to her position, her expression a blend of worry and determination. Jessica, oblivious to Emily's actions, remained standing with her arms crossed, her fury barely contained, though her authority seemed to wane. Ava sat in stark contrast, her calm demeanor unbroken, radiating quiet strength. The passengers around them couldn't look away, their gazes darting between Ava and Jessica, curiosity and unease mirrored in their expressions. A passenger seated nearby leaned toward Ava Harrington, their voice soft and filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Ava turned, offering a faint, reassuring smile. "I'm fine. Thank you." The cabin fell silent once again, broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. Despite her wet clothes, Ava maintained an air of composure, sitting upright without betraying any discomfort. She turned her gaze toward Jessica, her voice calm yet firm. "All you had to do was treat me like everyone else. But you failed, because you decided that I didn't belong here." Jessica gritted her teeth, her grip tightening on the tray she held. She stepped closer, her tone dripping with mockery. "Respect? Maybe you should earn it first. People like you don't deserve respect." The tension in the cabin thickened, suffocating and palpable. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, others shifted in their seats, unsure of how to react. Ava's voice sharpened, each word cutting through the heavy air like a blade. "You shouldn't say things like that." Her statement left a heavy silence in its wake, an undeniable weight that made everyone wonder what might happen next. Jessica crossed her arms, her stance defiant, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. She forced a scoffing laugh. "Please. I've been more than patient with you. Maybe now you'll learn that actions have consequences." Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering, her tone measured but laden with gravity. "Indeed, actions have consequences. And you're about to understand that better than anyone." Jessica froze for a moment, Ava's words chilling her to the core. She quickly shrugged off the feeling, curling her lips into a sneer. I'm not afraid of your empty threats. If anyone regrets this, it won't be me. Jessica turned sharply, trying to exude confidence. But deep inside, an unsettling doubt began to creep in. The judgmental stares from the passengers, Emily's horrified expression, and Ava's unyielding calm all conspired to tighten an invisible noose around her. Jessica scanned the cabin, searching for support, but found none. The businessman she had dismissed earlier sat with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and critical. The curious woman nearby whispered to her companion, shaking her head in disapproval. For the first time, Jessica began to realize she had gone too far. And now, the consequences loomed closer than ever. By the cockpit, Emily, the young flight attendant, clutched the passenger list tightly, her fingers trembling. Her face was pale, as though she wanted to disappear from the escalating scene. Meanwhile, Ava remained seated, her expression serene and composed. Slowly, she crossed one leg over the other, leaning back with a quiet confidence that only heightened Jessica's unease. Ava didn't need to shout or argue. Her silence spoke volumes, louder than any outburst. The tension in the cabin was almost unbearable, crackling like a storm on the verge of breaking. Jessica, desperate to regain control, paced near Ava's seat, her frustration evident in every step. But no matter what she said or did, the weight of her actions began to press down on her, unshakable and inescapable. Ava's earlier words echoed in her mind, "You're making a mistake." Jessica didn't realize that right after the slap, Ava had sent a message. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. A storm was brewing, and Jessica was about to face its full force. As Jessica paced back and forth, her movements agitated, Ava remained poised, unaffected, as though the situation had no power over her. Yet the weight of what had transpired bore down on Jessica, growing heavier with each passing second. Without a word, Ava reached for her phone. Her movements were deliberate, controlled. She typed a short message and placed the phone back on the armrest. The simplicity of the action carried an unspoken authority, drawing Jessica's uneasy gaze toward the device. Jessica's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. "What are you doing?" Ava didn't respond immediately. She leaned back slightly, her expression composed and unbothered. "You'll find out soon enough." Her words were calm, almost gentle, yet they carried a weight that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. The cabin fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the hum of the airplane engines. Passengers exchanged glances, their whispers barely audible over the tension. A curious woman leaned toward her companion, her voice soft, almost inaudible. "What's going on? Is she someone important?" Across the aisle, the businessman sat quietly, his expression calm yet knowing, as though he'd pieced together something no one else had. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest, his eyes fixed on Ava Harrington. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed from the front of the cabin. The cockpit door swung open, and the captain emerged. His face was pale, his expression tense. Scanning the cabin, he moved with swift determination toward Jessica. Jessica turned, her irritation evident as she addressed him curtly, "What's the issue?" The captain stopped directly in front of her, his posture rigid and authoritative. "You need to step aside," he said, his voice firm yet hesitant. Jessica's brows furrowed as she crossed her arms defensively. "Excuse me? Why should I? I'm handling this situation." The captain's eyes briefly flicked toward Ava before returning to Jessica. "I've just received a call from management. The owner of this aircraft is on board, and it's Miss Harrington." He gestured toward Ava as he spoke, his words dropping into the cabin like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Murmurs of disbelief spread like wildfire. The curious woman sat bolt upright, her eyes wide. "She owns the plane?" she whispered, her voice trembling with astonishment. The businessman gave a slight nod, his expression calm but laced with quiet satisfaction. "I suspected as much," he muttered, almost to himself. At the back of the cabin, Emily, the young flight attendant, froze in place. Her face, previously pale with fear, softened with a mix of relief and awe. Ava wasn't just a passenger, she held more power than anyone on the flight could have imagined. Jessica's face turned crimson as she stared at the captain, her voice faltering for the first time. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. The oppressive silence in the cabin deepened, broken only by the faint rumble of the engines. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, their minds replaying the earlier confrontation. Jessica stood motionless, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. Ava's silence, paired with the disapproving stares of the passengers, delivered a clear message. Jessica had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Jessica remained near the aisle, her arms folded tightly across her chest as she tried to maintain her composure. Around her, the discomfort in the cabin was palpable. Meanwhile, Ava sat poised and composed, her demeanor exuding quiet authority. Suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." The cabin erupted into hushed confusion. Passengers murmured among themselves, their unease mounting. The businessman leaned toward Ava, his tone low and inquisitive. "What's happening? Why are we landing?" Ava didn't respond. Her face remained calm, her emotions unreadable. Jessica's frown deepened as she directed her gaze toward the front of the cabin, her once steady confidence now visibly wavering. The plane touched down smoothly, its descent calm and controlled. Moments later, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside the aircraft. The vehicle's doors opened, and two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. They climbed the stairs with a quiet authority that captured everyone's attention. One of the assistants spoke, their tone warm yet formal. "Miss Harrington, everything is ready for your review." The air in the cabin thickened with anticipation. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale as the realization struck her like a tidal wave. "Miss Harrington?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. The assistants ignored Jessica entirely, their focus solely on Ava. "Is there anything you need before we proceed?" one of them asked respectfully. Ava rose slowly, her movements graceful yet commanding. She adjusted her blazer, her expression calm but emanating an undeniable power. "I am Ava Harrington," she began, her gaze sweeping the cabin, "the owner of this aircraft and this airline." Jessica's body stiffened, her previously confident posture crumbling as her hands began to tremble. Ava's eyes locked onto Jessica, her voice steady but razor-sharp. "Your behavior today has been disgraceful. You've demeaned yourself, mistreated a passenger, and tarnished the reputation of this airline." Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but her voice came out shaky and uncertain. I didn't know." Ava raised a hand, silencing her. "You didn't know because you didn't care to treat me with the basic respect every passenger deserves. Instead, you judged me, acted on prejudice, and escalated a situation that could have been resolved with minimal courtesy." A ripple of agreement spread through the cabin. Passengers nodded in silent support. Mr. Bennett, sitting nearby, folded his newspaper neatly and gave Ava an approving nod. Taking a step closer to Jessica, Ava continued, her voice calm but weighted with authority. "There was no mistake in your actions, Jessica." Jessica's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a sympathetic face. But all she found were cold stares and a few passengers discreetly recording the scene on their phones. Ava continued, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. "While you were busy judging me, you forgot your duty. Your duty is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are or what you assume about them. And now, there will be consequences." Jessica clenched her fists, her thoughts spiraling into chaos. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but no words came out. Ava turned to the captain. "I want this matter resolved immediately. And I want assurances that nothing like this will ever happen to anyone else again." The captain nodded, his voice steady and professional. "Understood, Miss Harrington." Jessica stumbled back a step, panic overtaking her. She glanced toward the exit, her instincts screaming for her to leave before the situation escalated further. But before she could take another step, the captain moved to block her path, his gaze unwavering. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. Ava's eyes bore into Jessica as she delivered her judgment with calm precision. Jessica, your actions today have proven that you are unfit for this position. Effective immediately, you are terminated. The pronouncement landed like a gavel striking in a courtroom, final and absolute. Jessica collapsed to her knees, her body trembling. Please, Miss Harrington, she whispered, her voice breaking. Ava's expression remained cold, her voice dropping to an icy tone. You didn't act unintentionally, you acted to avoid being caught. But now, the truth is clear, and you will face the consequences. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers boarded the plane, their presence sending a ripple of murmurs through the cabin. One of the officers addressed Ava with respectful authority. Miss Harrington, we've received your report. Would you like to press charges? Ava's voice was unwavering, resolute. Yes. She assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable. Jessica gasped, staggering backward, her voice frantic and desperate. Wait, this is just a misunderstanding. The officers stepped forward. One produced a pair of handcuffs, his tone calm but firm. Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. Jessica's breathing grew shallow and panicked as the reality of her situation sank in. Her eyes darted to Ava, who stood tall and composed, a picture of grace and authority, an unyielding contrast to Jessica's crumbling demeanor. The passengers watched in silence as the officers handcuffed Jessica. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled weakly against their hold. Please, Miss Harrington, I'm sorry, she pleaded. Ava's gaze remained steady, her voice calm but unyielding. Apologies mean nothing without accountability. Her words, quiet yet piercing, cut through the air. You made your choices. Now you face the consequences. The passengers continued to watch as Jessica was led down the aisle, her once arrogant demeanor replaced by shame and regret. Cameras discreetly recorded the moment, ensuring her downfall would not go unnoticed. Turning to address the cabin, Ava's voice carried an undeniable strength. I apologize to all of you for what occurred today. Is not the standard of service I expect on my flights. From this moment on, we will ensure that every passenger is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Applause erupted, filling the cabin with a sense of catharsis. Mr. Bennet clapped loudly, while Mrs. Bennet set aside her knitting to join in with polite enthusiasm. Ava approached Emily, the young flight attendant who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal. Her tone softened. Emily, I noticed your professionalism today. Thank you for standing up when it mattered. You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion. Emily's eyes widened in shock, her face lighting up with gratitude. Thank you, Miss Harrington, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Ava offered a small smile before turning toward the exit. Her 2 assistants followed closely, and the atmosphere on the plane shifted from tension to admiration. Justice had been served, and Ava had left a lasting impact no one would forget. As Ava stepped off the plane, a curious passenger leaned out of their seat, unable to contain their awe. Miss Harrington, you're incredible. Ava paused, her lips curving into a faint smile. Thank you. Remember this moment. Standing up. For what's right is always worth it. Outside, the fresh breeze greeted Ava as she descended the stairs to the waiting black SUV. The driver held the door open, bowing slightly, while her assistants briefed her on the next meeting. Yet Ava's thoughts lingered on the day's events, a reminder of the importance of standing firm against injustice. Later, during a live interview, Ava sat in the studio, her demeanor calm yet commanding. The host leaned forward, admiration evident in their voice. Miss Harrington, your story has gone viral. Millions of people have witnessed how you handled this situation. What message would you like to send to everyone watching? Ava held the host's gaze, her voice clear and deliberate. Respect is a right, not a privilege. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look, where they're from, or what others think of them. The host paused before asking, and for those facing similar challenges but feel voiceless? Ava turned to the camera, her expression softening but her tone resolute. Don't be afraid. Remember that doing the right thing always matters, and every act of courage is worth recognizing." Ava smiled, her voice warm yet filled with quiet strength. "True power comes from within. Even when you feel invisible, remember your worth. You don't need a title or wealth to demand respect. You just need to remain steadfast in who you are." Weeks later, Ava boarded another flight. This time, she was greeted by an entirely different crew. The atmosphere was warm, professional, and imbued with a genuine sense of welcome. The lead flight attendant offered a respectful bow, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "Welcome aboard, Miss Harrington. It's an honor to have you with us." Ava returned the smile with a gentle nod. As she settled into her seat, there was an unmistakable shift in the air, lighter, more accommodating, and above all, respectful. Gazing out of the window as the runway blurred into the horizon beneath the glowing sky, a sense of peace filled her. The events of that fateful day had left a deep impression, not only on those aboard the flight but also on everyone who had witnessed the story unfold. Ava knew her actions had transformed an instance of injustice into a profound lesson, one that would ripple far beyond the confines of that single plane. She smiled softly, realizing that the most powerful victories are not those that assert authority but those that inspire change. Once the passengers had settled, Ava quietly reached for her phone. After everything that had happened, she understood this was no longer about her. It was about reshaping a system that allowed prejudice and false assumptions to thrive. As the plane soared into the sky, Ava sat by the window in the first row, watching the stunning skyline stretch into infinity. The world below faded into a canvas of blue and white. She gazed out at the endless expanse, a profound calm washing over her. This wasn't just about confronting bias or asserting her position. It was about turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would outlive the flight itself. Ava's faint reflection in the glass seemed to mirror her quiet smile. She knew this was only the beginning. With every decision, every policy, and every act of leadership, she was shaping a future where respect and kindness would be the norm, not the exception. The plane climbed higher, its engines humming a soothing rhythm, heading toward its destination. Ava, seated firmly at the helm of her vision, felt a quiet pride that no turbulence could shake. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Ava addressed the world directly. Her voice, clear and heartfelt, resonated in a video that quickly went viral. "Luxury isn't about appearances. It's about the experience we create for everyone. True success isn't measured by what you can buy but by how you treat others." She paused, her steady gaze fixed on the camera. "This is why I am implementing new policies across my airline to ensure every passenger, no matter who they are, feels valued and respected." Her statement ignited a wave of conversation across social media. Hashtags like #RespectAboveAll and #AvasVision trended for days, inspiring people to reflect on their own behavior and biases. Passengers smiled as Ava's story spread, touching the hearts of all who heard it. The lesson she left behind wasn't just for that one day but for a future where respect and kindness would always take precedence. If you were Ava, how would you handle this situation? Have you ever stood up for respect and fairness, even when it came at a personal cost? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire others and create positive change. If this story moved you, help us spread the message of respect and kindness. Thank you for your support. Together, let's build a world where everyone is treated fairly and with dignity. Wishing you a meaningful and inspiring day ahead. Thank you for supporting this channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are curated from various sources and do not represent any specific individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If any inaccuracies are found, please understand with compassion. Wishing you all the best in life.